To Decoupling Drupal Commerce out of the box at Drupal Camp Asheville 2018. I'm Ryan Szrama with Commerce Guys. I started the company, I was reminded, at DrupalCon DC roughly 9 years ago, and then took it over again a couple of years ago in February 2016 when we separated from platform.sh, which many of us have probably heard of and used. And that was a product that we had incubated within Commerce Guys to support Drupal Commerce that really became the prime driver of the company, and splitting from them allowed us to refocus on the actual software again and the project and the community. So Commerce Guys today is now back up to 10 people, with an 11th joining us soon to provide some marketing support for us. Our two lead developers for Commerce 2.x, which is for Drupal 8, are Boyan Zivanovic, Boyan Z at Drupal.org, and Matt Glaman. If you've seen them, they're almost always in Drupal Slack in the Commerce channel answering somebody's problem, and that's good because it's kind of right there in the mission of helping teams succeed with Drupal Commerce. Additionally, beyond just developing Drupal Commerce, we kind of maintain this whole ecosystem around the project. Has anybody been to an e-commerce conference? Not a Drupal conference, but just a general they're massive. There's one in Chicago every year called IRCE, and if you go there, you see what Shopify puts together in Magento and Domainware and everything, and what you begin to realize is that these projects, we call them projects, even though they're all SaaS products and proprietary products, their ecosystems are just enormous to the point that we have a 10 by 10 little booth, and they have a 100 by 100 whole section of the floor that I think last year Shopify turned it into the deck of the Starship Enterprise, and you could go and have cocktails and get your picture. Just crazy. So what we do at a much smaller level is try to begin doing the same things they're doing for Drupal Commerce that help it kind of stand up alongside of those projects, such as maintaining other contribs, actually bringing discipline and consistency to documentation. We only recently appointed someone to be the documentation lead, named Lisa Streeter, who joined us off of Drupal Easy, which is great. And then of course engage partners to help grow the ecosystem. And so those would be people like PayPal, MailChimp, Authorize.net, Amazon, etc. And what we've grown, by leading the project and through the contributions of other people, many of whom are in this room, is really like a total ecosystem that does power some billions of dollars in transactions per year. And actually kind of made up this number before we had the case study go live on Drupal.org for Z Kung Fu, which is kind of a headless Drupal Commerce implementation for a Chinese fast food chain that alone drives $300, $400, $500 million of transactions through Drupal Commerce applications, which I think is a scale that maybe folks who are casually aware of Drupal Commerce don't necessarily know what we achieve. But it's good to remind ourselves that this is the kind of scale Drupal Commerce can and does operate at, because I think it gives us a healthy appreciation for how competitive the project is relative to other platforms. And what's great about it is that on other platforms you might spend $1 billion just to get your license lined up. You can literally pay $500,000 just to get a license to use Domainware, and then still have $1 million of spend to build and integrate and develop the site. And I've seen companies do that do no more than $2-3 million in revenue a year. Right? I just can't imagine spending that amount of money for a website that drives so little revenue. But those are the other options. And so part of what we're doing with Drupal Commerce, why we go to events, why we just really try to obsessively support people using it, is to get more people operating at that level. So it's good for Drupal, it's good for the project. Obviously it would be good for us as well. So some of the projects that we've done on Drupal 8 with Commerce 2.x at that scale are projects like Sport Obermeyer's full product catalog, which was B2B plus B2C plus loyalty program all in one with different checkout flows and crazy customizations aside. We've talked about this in the past. We have case studies on Drupal.org and sessions at DrupalCon Dublin and elsewhere if you want to learn more about that project. We've supported other teams' projects that are also operating at a high scale. Adapt is a Danish agency that created, really this giant online flower store, and we're gracious enough to fund a lot of commerce shipping development as part of that project's budget, which is kind of a fun way that we get to grow the project, is partnering with agencies who are willing to fund contributed module efforts. And all of this kind of brings us to like the topic of this session, which is like, what does it look like to begin to decouple Drupal Commerce out of the box? Because we have current merchants that are using Drupal Commerce operating at scale that are hitting, you know, these sorts of scalability problems that come out of just using Drupal native for both the back end and the front end. And the reality is, like, for any of the projects that we're involved with from the beginning, we're trying to get ahead of those performance and scalability problems, because we know that like once you get to $10 million in revenue, if the site stops working, you'll be even more sad than if you had $10,000 in revenue and it stopped working. Like you lose a serious amount of money when your site goes down. But we also see that on the tail end, when we get brought into projects that have been running for a while, it's almost always to address an initial performance problem. Sometimes we're talking like 15-minute fixes to solve problems that have led people to re-platform off of Drupal Commerce. So they've already made a decision to go to Magento because they've heard Magento can scale and Drupal Commerce can't, and oh, we have this problem. We get in there and say, oh, hey, like if you just train, and tech speak here, just change your transaction isolation level to read instead of read committed or whatever the default is in Drupal, your problems will go away. And they do it, and they're like, great, that solved exactly what, if only we found you 3 months ago, we've already started to re-platform to Magento. I'm like, yeah, if only. So what can we do to find, you know, the people that don't necessarily work with us at the beginning of a project and help them prevent or help them avoid getting into these kinds of binds? And so while the previous, I'm getting ahead of myself. And one of the biggest reasons people get themselves into binds is because they just go and grab a contributed module that wasn't necessarily developed or tested for performance impact. And so they kind of, you know, just end up shooting themselves in the foot by adopting something that maybe looked cool but turned out to not necessarily improve performance in practice once you got going and got up to speed. So that's where the Plymouth came in. And so, like, scalability is a problem for Drupal Commerce, but it's not because Drupal Commerce can't scale. And I think that we can say the same thing about Drupal, right? Scalability is a problem for Drupal, but it's not that Drupal can't scale. It's just that if you've never considered the implications of the field info cache, for example, you know, you might just go get trigger happy and create a dozen content types with 40 fields on each of them, and suddenly your field info cache just grows massive. And we've seen projects that get their, you know, model every bit of their product data out in their sort of field data model, and they end up with a field info cache that actually exceeds, what is it, 32 megabyte.
Max packet?
What's that?
Is it max
No,
packet?
I'm not thinking of max allowed packet. I'm actually memcache, the memcache limit, right? So once they get above a certain you know, threshold, and memcache says, oh, this is too much data for me to store in memory, and they just ignore it. So like they don't realize that the way they built the site, you know, will prevent very common caching strategies. Right, so you have to try to like then work your way backwards, and it's really hard to remove hundreds of fields from a site once it's already in production and they've got all this data around these things. We've also seen people that would, you know, create fields for every little bit of, you know, product data, then create a product catalog view that just rendered everything, and then use CSS to hide the stuff they didn't want to show. Right, we can imagine why that might create problems. So we even saw that with add to cart forms, right? They would, we've seen sites that on the product catalog would actually render this really big add to cart form that maybe had dozens and dozens of variations, and then use CSS to display it on the sucker because it didn't need to be on the catalog page. Like, oh man, like you're you know, people that aren't familiar with Drupal and therefore aren't familiar with Drupal Commerce just don't realize the net impact that has when you then have 50 products in a product grid on a catalog page and say 100 people hitting that page all at once. No wonder, you know, you hit performance issues. And a similar and related issue to that one is form cache bloat. A lot of contributed modules, you know, they just kind of like define a new form to throw in somewhere. And so consider the impact again. Imagine a product catalog that has, say, you know, 50 products showing in a product grid, and you want to do product comparison. Well, a sort of back-end Drupal developer might think, oh cool, I just need to define a new form that somebody can click a button to add a product to their comparison cart or whatever it is, and then I can have a compare page where they can actually go and see the products listed out side by side and compare whatever stats they wanted to compare. So there's a contributed module for this. But again, it's like a 6-foot-tall spoiler, because it adds a form to every product teaser, and so then suddenly every catalog page has 50 new forms on it, which all get stored in the form cache. 100 people all hit it at the same time, those forms are all rendered. The form cache goes crazy, and suddenly you've got gigabytes and gigabytes of data just hitting the data, being written to and read from the database. You just can't scale that way. So these are real problems we've encountered. And obviously there's the common one of, once you have the session within Drupal, you're going to miss the form cache anytime you're rendering the page, and so varnish is skipped, the page cache is skipped, whatever else it is that you're doing to try to prevent or try to improve page loads. All that stuff gets skipped as soon as you add a product to the cart, or if you're using like the product comparison module and you add a product to your comparison cart. And so I think if we were disciplined to think through the performance impact of our features in advance, at the start of a project, we could avoid getting to a point where corporate's unhappy because the site can't handle more than 10 customers at the same time. And avoid the kind of scenario where a merchant adopts Drupal Commerce based on our good advice, has a horrible experience with it, and then badmouths Drupal Commerce to the next dozen people they talk to about it. So we hear that a lot, that Drupal Commerce can't scale. We hear that from companies within the Drupal ecosystem, right? There's one company, I won't name them to avoid a mudslinging competition, but they kind of have a habit of kind of dumping on Drupal Commerce and how it just can't scale on Drupal Planet, right? Which is really unfair if you consider the fact that other companies have made it scale, and they have posted case studies and talked about strategies to make this work. But if one person has a poor experience, then that kind of just becomes a cancer that spreads, right? And gives the project a bad reputation and gives Drupal, by extension, a bad reputation. I was trying to think of the health and human services example. Like the healthcare.gov, the Drupal side was fine. It was just the non-Drupal side that wasn't. But anyways, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do by solving scalability and performance problems is improve the reputation of the project, increase the likelihood that a merchant will be successful with it, and ideally prevent a lot of rework for those of us in the room that are selling Drupal Commerce projects and don't like to lose money on our services. Basically, what we found is that every one of our projects that we have to take into high performance scenarios, and I'm talking like thousands of orders an hour, peak times of thousands of concurrent shoppers, browsing the product catalog, adding products to the cart, that kind of stuff. We've tested those loads. Every one of them comes to a point where we just start to replace components with custom JavaScript. That means we aren't, as Drupal developers, historically trained to consider, I could just make this a JavaScript thing. I could use a cookie instead of a session variable, and suddenly manage my product comparison that way. So not to pick on this one module, but it was just like a recent example that sticks in my mind. A product comparison feature doesn't need to be writing information to your Drupal database. This is purely a client-side concern that you don't really need to be collecting data in your database for. A cookie, could store the product IDs that you've added to your comparison list, and then when you want to render the product comparison chart, you can just go to a page that requests data via an API request, maybe to a custom endpoint, and then has a JavaScript template to render out this table, right? So, but as Drupal developers, we're not necessarily trained to think that way. We think, I've got views, and so obviously I'm going to use views to render this display, and I've got entities, so maybe I need a new entity type to store the items that are in my quote cart, and yada yada yada. And so what we're trying to do in our projects is think through what can we replace with just front-end JavaScript components, whether that's using existing stuff in Drupal or our own custom stuff. And so one of our largest customers and end users is a Drupal 7 site still, based in Europe, that actually started using Drupal Commerce. Is that my next slide? Yeah, okay, we'll stay here. Started using Drupal Commerce on their own as a startup. I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago. And it was just a small team, a handful of folks that started the company. and developed a prototype for selling their product online, and then went and raised successive rounds of venture capital, growing this business, to well over $10 million in sales a year. And continue to grow, continue to scale, and so on. What's great about the story from my perspective is like the project leaders, that this code that we created and then the Drupal community contributed to and built enabled this small team to have one person build a site and then begin to grow his team around maintaining the site, and then eventually get to the point where like their best efforts internally were spent on front end and marketing and operations tasks, and then they reached out to commerce guys to start to optimize the site to grow them to the next level. So that they didn't necessarily have the internal technical competency or the time to think about scalability and performance. And so they essentially outsourced that bit of the project to us, while they then focused on optimizing the front end and finding new vendors for product catalog displays or fulfillment in new territories and yada yada. And so what we discovered is that like doing something simple like replacing the shopping cart block with custom JavaScript and custom endpoints that were feeding the product JSON out that was needed to build that cart gave them a drastic performance increase. So that we were able to get them up to thousands of concurrent customers. And that even looked like replacing the actual form in that cart interface to links, right? So it looks, we'll render it to look like a form, but in reality it's just links that toggle the quantities up and down or remove an item. And so of course these are all tokenized links, but it's just a JSON feed that we create server side, and then a JavaScript template on the client side that's just loading that data asynchronously, so they can still serve the contents of that page from the cache. The product data, cart data can be loaded in asynchronously, and whenever they want to manipulate the contents of the cart, they don't have to touch the Forms API at all. So you bypass the render API completely, which is like the slowest part of Drupal still, as far as I know. You bypass the form system completely, so we don't have the form cache bloat that I was talking about, obviously. And you keep a pretty simple, straightforward data model. So that, like, this is for us. I think oftentimes when people talk about decoupled Drupal, they focus on maybe the adoption problem of needing to be able to increase adoption amongst new developers who focus just on front-end frameworks and don't really care about the back end. We talk about user experience challenges that we're trying to overcome, where JavaScript would make things prettier and support newer UX patterns. I had a third one in mind. It was from a session earlier. Anyways, but what people don't necessarily talk about whenever I hear them talk about it is just the performance impact of a highly interactive website being able to outsource a lot of this interactivity to the front end and to the client. And I mean, we're not there yet. I'm again getting ahead of my slides here, but like in a perfect world, in my mind, you wouldn't even need to touch the database to create a shopping cart on a Drupal Commerce website. The items that you've added to your cart would just be retained client-side in the client browser, and then you just validate those cart contents when you need to. So whenever somebody proceeds to checkout, validate it, create the cart, and then carry somebody on through the checkout flow. But so just think about that, and whenever I pause for Q&A, like just be curious to hear about like what other people are doing to begin decoupling the sort of interactive portions of their Drupal site for the sake of performance and scalability, not just fancy new features. As far as like current status in Commerce 2 goes, I can't remember the last release. The last release was like 2.6 or 2.7. We basically have like a monthly or near monthly release of Drupal Commerce right now. And in order to test that, the quickest way to begin test driving it is using the demo project, which this came up earlier too. If anybody used Commerce Kickstart 2.x for Drupal 7, the demo project is basically that, except it's prettier and you can actually use it to launch a new project, and it has console commands for blowing away the demo data without losing the structure of the site. Things that like we never really could do in Commerce Kickstart. So just try to make it both a great demo project. I think you can see it online right now if you have your laptop at braintree.commercekickstart.com. But we also want it to be a useful starting point for stores. So, my goal for this is to have a demo project that anybody can take and then go launch a new Drupal Commerce store for say under 10 grand. with the custom theme and whatever configuration you need. And we're kind of testing this now with a former employee who's got a company in Switzerland, trying to see what we can do to get him up and running with Drupal Commerce using the default store theme, and then just lightly modifying that, because otherwise we'll lose everybody to Shopify and WooCommerce and any other platform that can build more affordable sites. Once we had the demo project going, we did try to improve the user interface of the shopping cart. So we had like basically a slide-in modal, or a flyout, whatever you want to call it, that comes in from the side and would render a views form in there to manage the shopping cart contents. But we knew we wanted to kind of like decouple that so that we weren't dependent on views or the Forms API in order to manage the cart contents. Because again, we knew that like our largest customers needed that, but it's not like a small customer who can use it out of the box doesn't need that. They just may not realize the performance impact until they then scale to become the large company, and then hate on Drupal Commerce because they think it can't scale. So initially, of course, we wanted to use the JSON API module and kind of latch onto that initiative, but we identified some shortcomings in the schema as they've implemented it. Specifically at first with respect to embedded entity relationships. So the idea that like loading a product in Drupal Commerce actually requires you to load the product entity and its variation entities in order to then render the add to cart form. Or if you're loading an order, you're not just getting an order object, you also have all of its related order items and customer profiles and so on. So you can see why that would be a problem if we have to have separate API requests for every bit of data. Boyan tells me that presently there's still an issue in the collection resources, which is the kind of API endpoint that lets you get a collection of a certain type of data. That right now, for some reason, it's restricted to like entities of the same bundle, or is it? It's entities of the same bundle. So you can't just like fetch me the last 10 published nodes. You can only get me the last 10 published article nodes. Or, if I wanted to load the contents of an order, then I have to have like a separate request for each type of order item, which is the new name for line items in Commerce. So some things prevented us from just fully adopting it. We wanted to move faster, and so what we did was we created the Commerce Cart API module, which defines endpoints that are just a bit more targeted toward shopping cart management requirements. So the Commerce Cart API, you can use it standalone. We now have used it both for the Commerce Cart Flyout and to support a mobile app that's using Commerce 2.x as the backend. And the idea is that the Cart Flyout will appear whenever you click the Add to Cart button, and then instead of bringing up the modal dialog like we had in Commerce Kickstart 2.x, it'll just fly in the sidebar, which you'll then see. We'll get the updated cart contents and let you manipulate the shopping cart there, and then proceed to checkout, and so on. And I think this is a pretty common paradigm. Honestly, I think I first saw it on Lush UK's website. They were one of like the largest Drupal 7 case studies we had for Drupal Commerce. But because of their scale, they also had to have this kind of like JavaScript first approach. They could still cache the whole page and then load in the dynamic content asynchronously. So we have that all going now, and then these are part of the demo project. So like fully decoupling Drupal Commerce is still some ways out. And if I had my druthers, by the end of next year, we'd have that both publicly available and offer some sort of managed version of that. For merchants that just want a commerce backend. But if you think about all the things that are in Drupal Commerce, like a lot of stuff's going to be hard to decouple. So for example, in the backend of Drupal Commerce, you can configure multiple checkout flows for different types of orders. So if I have a B2B order versus a B2C order, I then might have different checkout flows with different checkout panes and components showing. How do I turn that into an API that will just be automatically discoverable, navigable, renderable by React and Vue and whatever other framework you're using? Like that's kind of a hard problem. And that's the kind of problem we like to solve, but it's going to take us some time to get there, because once we're there, we're kind of ahead where Drupal is. Drupal is beginning to decouple the administrative interface, so that's cool. I know that Lullabot's kind of leading the way there, and the API First initiative is focusing on that. And that will eventually work toward our benefit with decoupling add to cart and checkout forms and so on. But the schemas that are currently at play for like hypermedia APIs within Drupal don't have forms or link templates or things that that the hypermedia REST world has developed, but just haven't made their way into our world yet. If you are curious about learning more, I recommend checking out Collection.json, or even HAL.json, which I believe also supports templates and for forms and queries. But the idea here is that an API request can return not just the data you've requested, but also like a form template for building a form that could manipulate that data. And the form template is just like defining the query parameters that you can pass in on a GET request, or the post parameters that you can send in, from some rendered form on your site. So we want to get there. That's the goal by the end of next year. But right now we're just focusing on the sort of progressive decoupling strategy. We started with the shopping cart because that's the obvious way for us to help large websites avoid a very common bottleneck for performance. Now we're trying to make sure that anybody can access this, use it, demo it. And so that's going to bring us here to the demo site. So you can try out all this today by using a composer create project command. It basically runs the entire build for you, builds the whole code base, sets up the Drupal project. I use MAMP Pro locally. Do I have any MAMP Pro users? All right, got some holdouts. I mean, like, if it ain't broke, right? So everybody else on my team, they give me grief for not having either just, my own VPSs or virtual machines or Lando or whatever else, but I'm a holdout. So you can just point MAMP Pro to your web directory when this is all done and install and get a full, nice demo project. So let's go look at the demo site real quick. And so out of the box, the colors appear a bit off to me. And we don't have a horrible contrast ratio like that. So that should be like a more rich purple. So just imagine you see a very rich purple right now. The theme is called Belgrade in honor of Bojan, the lead developer. That's his hometown. So the idea is that just like with Commerce Kickstart 2.x, it's defining product types. Some have product attributes, others don't. It imports a whole bunch of demo content for which we created the Commerce demo module. Believe it or not, there isn't like a great way to ingest demo content from a feed right now in Drupal 8. Even Umami, the core out of the box initiative, had to create their own pattern for this. So we did that in Commerce Demo. We just kind of create a whole bunch of stock products. Of course, clicking add to cart does not currently connect right into Cart Flyout because I need to update the demo profile. Once you have the cart, you can evaluate your cart contents, remove things, so on. Proceed to checkout, and you basically get, it's basically Shopify out of the box. So if you're familiar with buying things from Shopify websites, you typically have the 2-column format. You can enter your coupon code over in the sidebar, shipping, billing information, payment, yada yada, and that's it. So this all comes out of the box. I don't bother going through the whole kit and caboodle because I haven't configured shipping yet. But it requires a lot less to achieve this functionality in Commerce 2 than it did in Commerce 1. So really it's just like Drupal Commerce, the shipping module, the demo module, and the cart flyout, and I think that's it. Everything else is just vanilla Drupal Commerce 2.x. So things like the checkout wizard are just part of core now. Things like a full promotion system are just part of the core project now. We actually just received funding from a company called 9Media to add, based in Norway. They've been with us since the UberCart days. But they funded full BOGO support, right? So this is historically one of the hardest types of promotions to get right. We had it in Drupal 7 in the Commerce Discount Extra project. They funded it, we architected it and designed the sort of simpler UX with Bojan. He's now implemented it, and there it is. So we have the sort of BOGOs, fixed amount, percentage off discounts, shipping discounts, that kind of stuff, all out of the box, along with coupon support and various sort of, we kind of, because we don't have rules in Drupal 8, it's just like a simplified conditions UI that we created that basically drives your conditional applicability of things like promotions, coupons, shipping rules, payment methods, and so on. So this is what Drupal Commerce looks like out of the box. And the goal, as I said, is to continue to improve it, to decouple more of the front end as we go. I'm not sure that we'll bother with decoupling the back end. We'll kind of let Drupal take care of that, but it's kind of a complicated user interface that when we talk about pain versus reward, we'll just focus on the front end. So that's what we have now. Again, I don't think Matt has committed like the most recent work that we've been doing for another client, like a large retailer that basically wants to sort of click the add to cart button, immediately open the flyout, and then proceed to checkout if you want to. But all that's kind of work in progress with issues in the queues. If you want to find out where those are, it's just Commerce Cart API on Drupal.org, and apparently I opened up two of the same page. So Commerce Cart Flyout is where kind of the improved shopping cart experience is being managed as well. And then the whole demo project is just up on GitHub under Drupal Commerce /demo-project. And it really is just like a single composer command to immediately build a full development environment. And that's what I use for all my local development and testing now. All right. I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions that I can answer briefly about progressive decoupling strategy, current status, any strategies you've implemented that I didn't cover or that I did, but you just kind of want to give us a case study on the fly? Has anybody launched a Drupal Commerce project on Drupal 8 yet in here? Couple, yeah?
Actually, I would ask one question about that. So, I know you talk about decoupling from the rules module. Now, I have started messing around with the rules module in Drupal 8, and I do know it's still pretty limited compared to how it was set up in 7.
Yeah.
Are you planning to eventually integrate with that, or is it something you're just planning to stay decoupled?
Yeah, so the question for the recording was, what's the strategy for the near future with rules as that module gets closer to completion? One of our team members, Andras Šervik from Budapest, is really interested in helping complete rules for Drupal 8. And insofar as he's able to do that, that would include commerce integrations. Or ideally, we wouldn't have to do any integration at all because we define our events. And so ideally, rules would just be able to create rules events for any event that we define in our code. I'm hoping there's not a whole lot that we have to do like we did before to integrate it. Although obviously we'd still have to consider actions and different types of conditions and so on. But it's not like a core priority for us for two reasons. One was they still got a long way to go to be fully released. And not because there's necessarily a ton of work, but if it's underfunded or the folks just aren't available, then it's going to be slow going, and we don't have the bandwidth right now to really materially impact that. But the other thing is that Drupal 8 is just a much better development platform than Drupal 7 was. You can write a single class file as a plugin or service or resolver, various types of classes that we use in Drupal 8 now that let you more easily alter functionality of the system. And rules always was a scripting language, right? I always compared it to the Bard's Tale construction kit. Anybody played the Bard's Tale games? There's a scripting engine that you could create your own Bard's Tale game for in the, mid-90s. And for the average layperson, it's inscrutable because people don't understand variable scoping, and so they don't realize why they need to use entity as field or comparison on the entity bundle to have access to the fields they've added to their So it kind of it was a programming language that required a lot of the person implementing it, and so we just kind of made the decision that trying to create simpler user interfaces, like you saw in the promotions UI, or as an example, I can go to the payment gateways list. All right, so determining payment gateway ability, like the average merchant, this is still not great, but the average merchant is more likely to be able to come in here and say, okay, either all of these conditions must pass or only one must pass. So that's basically and versus or, and then just turn on, specific conditions right from a single interface. That's much better for the average merchant than what rules could offer. So, from our perspective, anything that you would use rules for, we try to encourage people to just write a module for.
Okay.
Which it may still be somewhat limiting. It turns out there are a lot of people that, they did learn the rules programming language, but didn't necessarily learn PHP and Drupal module development. But I think insofar as we're able to try to level their skills up would be a better use of our time than trying to really make rules capable. So I'm not sure if that's a controversial opinion or not, but that's just where we are right now. So all opinions subjects to review in a future game. Any other questions or? Yeah.
You'd mentioned you had a slide, something in effect of every really high performance need had to use JavaScript in some format, and it was either you guys doing custom or sort of leaning on other Drupalisms.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share an example of the other Drupalism, other route that wouldn't just be custom JavaScript that
you mean so like eking out additional increased performance on a site that aside from just going client side of things? Is that?
I guess I understood it that you were saying there were some sort of out of the box Drupal avenues that you
right, yeah, like the transaction isolation level, changing that, yeah. So when thinking about other things that prevent our customer sites from scaling, oftentimes it's just kind of like, I think most often people just don't necessarily know what they're doing, right, and create problems for themselves. So for example, we had a customer where some previous developer on the project that the current team we ended up working with was pre-rendering the checkout review page and then storing that in a variable per order and then never deleting it after it was displayed. Right, and so after a few thousand orders came through, the variables table, which gets loaded on every page load into the conf array, the global array, had about 3,000, multi-kilobyte chunks of rendered HTML in it, right? And so it's oftentimes we do find a lot of stuff like that where just people don't realize the impact of these things, and in that case too. I mean, once they got to a point where Memcache could no longer store, various things that you might use Memcache for, your configuration variables, your field info cache or whatever, then suddenly, even though they had it and it was properly configured, it was irrelevant because it wasn't being used anyways. I think we also had to adjust, I forget the name of it, the stampede control on Memcache as well. Trying to think through other typical things that we're researching. So it's database optimization, it's cache optimization, and specific to the Drupal Commerce context, there's definitely, and Andy can testify here, issues with pre-save hooks, causing basically recursive loading and saving loops. So you might load an order and then look at your database and realize that same friggin' order just got saved 10 times when you loaded it because of a whole bunch of things, monkeying around in the pre-save hooks and cart refresh and so on and so forth. So really, in Commerce 2.x, we're mitigating a lot of that by not doing full cart refreshes until you actually get to the checkout page. We do a shallow price calculation and then do the full calculation once you actually land on checkout. Or even you can trigger it earlier if you want to, but just trying to defer a lot of the heavy processing that we used to just do, kind of to brute force it. So if I kind of illustrate my mindset in Drupal 7 was as I was developing the modules, it was kind of like over-engineering from a capabilities or flexibility standpoint. So I would think, I never want somebody to buy a product at the wrong price because people could lose money, right? And that's a good impulse. I want the merchant to always get the amount of money they expect they're going to get when somebody buys a product from them. And so on every page load, anytime a shopping cart order was loaded, we recalculated the prices, which, if the price changed, would result in a save. And whenever we were saving line items, at least for a while, I think we stopped this, it was certain kinds of promotion line items would get deleted and recreated, right? So it wasn't even an update query, it was just a delete and an insert, right? So you're really losing database performance here, but on every single page load. So if I then have 500 people shopping on my website, and every time they load a page, it's and it was like a good impulse, but a really poor implementation. Because there are other ways to ensure that people get the right price, which is, just when you need to recalculate, do it once when they hit the checkout form, and then catch that price for 15 minutes, and whatever other strategy you want to have. Another real classic example in Commerce 1.x was what I called the sell price pre-calculation feature, which most people don't even know exists, but that's the reason that forever you always had to do price calculation through rules. I wanted some way to be able to pre-calculate every potential price of every product on a website. And the idea was neat, because what that lets you do is then sort a view based on calculated prices for each individual user based on which pricing rules will apply for them. And like theoretically that's great, but like practically, if you have 1,000 SKUs and 30 different permutations of potential pricing rules might apply, like you're going to have millions of rows in this table, and it just was never even, I don't even think we ever even ended up creating the sort plugins for views to make that work. So it's that kind of stuff, but also just getting rid of forms, and just using tokenized links for things. I mean, like removing a product doesn't need a form. Adding a product to the cart doesn't need a form, maybe with the exception of selecting attributes, and but even that, like you could kind of pre-compile some of that stuff into again a tokenized link that matches the product ID with the selected attributes. So like long term, like I see it's just being able to bypass Forms API entirely, avoid views entirely for rendering, avoid Drupal entirely for rendering, and then of course you're fully decoupled. But are there obvious things that I'm missing that anybody else has had to like kind of really fine tune to make Drupal Commerce scale? I'm trying to think. We also get into like lazy. Anytime you're interacting with third-party API, say to like stream analytics data to a third-party API, what we've begun doing is just doing that on the end of a page request. In like the destructor, right? So that it's all been rendered, it's all the output's been streamed to the customer, and then as that process is being destroyed, it's doing this for like long tail API requests or batch processes that I think is similar to how poor man's cron operates now in Drupal 8. But let's not quote me on that. I think we're at time. I'm happy to chat more about this. I know that that there's definitely still a lot more like ambition than we have delivered. We've got a good start. We're tied into the API first and JavaScript modernization initiatives. Specifically, Matt Glomman from our team is really directing that effort for us. So if you want to contribute or learn more, hitting him up is the best place to start. And you can see him at Decoupled Dev Days in New York City in August. If that's not on your radar, it'd be a great event to attend if this is an interest of yours. And the final plug will be for Drupal Europe. If anybody fancies a trip to Frankfurt, Germany, or Darmstadt, the sort of boring suburb of Frankfurt, Germany, consider Drupal Europe. There's a full Drupal Commerce track this year, or e-commerce track, but there's a dozen or so sessions in there, and most of them will be Drupal Commerce related, including talking about decoupling Drupal Commerce, scaling it. I know that 1x Internet has a case study I think they presented at Drupal Dev Days in Lisbon as well, where they have a headless Commerce 2.x site tied into a virtual reality shopping application. So they have like the full headset, and they're shopping and browsing the product catalog and buying things, and it's really pretty cool. So they'll be displaying that at Drupal Europe as well. So thanks for your time.